In a small, quiet town in the Midwest, there was a courtroom that didn't see much action. Most days it sat empty, its wooden benches collecting dust and its walls echoing only the faint hum of fluorescent lights. But today, something unusual was about to unfold. The room buzzed with tension as people filled the seats. Some curious locals, a few reporters scribbling notes, and two police officers who seemed unusually confident for men testifying against someone accused of theft. At the center of all this attention was a young black woman sitting at the defendant's table. She looked calm, almost too calm for someone facing serious charges. Her name, or rather, the name she was using, was Lena Johnson. To everyone in that room, including the cops ready to testify against her, she appeared like just another person caught up in the system. What no one knew, not even the judge presiding over the case, was that this woman wasn't who she claimed to be. Far from being an ordinary suspect, she was actually Dr. Evelyn Carter, the first African-American female director of the FBI. Evelyn had spent years climbing the ranks of law enforcement, earning respect, and breaking barriers along the way. But today she wasn't here as the powerful leader of one of the most important agencies in the country. Instead, she was undercover, posing as a low-level suspect to investigate corruption within local police departments. It was a risky move, but Evelyn believed deeply in getting to the truth, no matter how dangerous or complicated the path might be. The case itself revolved around a petty theft charge, a few stolen items found in a car registered under Lena's name. On paper, it seemed straightforward enough, but Evelyn knew better. This wasn't about stolen goods, it was about exposing a pattern of abuse and misconduct by certain members of the police force. These officers had been setting people up, framing them for crimes they didn't commit and covering their tracks for years. And now, Evelyn was determined to catch them red-handed. As the trial began, the atmosphere grew heavier. The prosecutor called the first witness to the stand, one of the officers involved in the alleged theft investigation. He walked up confidently, adjusting his uniform as if he owned the place. His partner followed close behind, smirking as they took their seats near the front. They exchanged glances, clearly amused by the situation. To them, this was just another day on the job, another chance to flex their authority over someone they saw as powerless. From the moment the questioning started, it became clear these officers weren't taking this seriously. One of them leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms as he described how they'd caught Lena with the stolen property. His tone dripped with condescension, as if he couldn't believe anyone would doubt their version of events. At one point he chuckled, shaking his head while talking about how someone like her wouldn't stand a chance in court. His partner joined in, adding snide comments whenever she got the chance. "You should have seen her face when we showed up," she said, laughing lightly. She looked so scared, like a deer in headlights. The gallery erupted in soft giggles, though some attendees shifted uncomfortably in their seats. There was something unsettling about the way these officers spoke about the defendant, as if she were less than human, unworthy of basic respect. All the while, Evelyn sat silently, her expression unreadable. Inside, however, her mind raced. Every word out of those officers' mouths fueled her determination. Their arrogance wasn't just annoying, it was infuriating. These were supposed to be public servants, people entrusted with protecting others. Yet here they were, mocking someone they thought was beneath them, completely oblivious to the fact that they were playing right into her hands. Little did they know, every smirk, every joke, every insult was being noted, not just by Evelyn, but by the team of federal agents monitoring the proceedings from outside. This wasn't just a trial, it was a trap, carefully laid to expose the rot within the system. And soon, very soon, these officers would realize they'd made the biggest mistake of their careers. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker, with emotions simmering just below the surface. The two officers at the center of the trial were growing bolder with every passing minute. Their smug grins and dismissive remarks painted a clear picture. They didn't see the defendant as a person. To them, she was just another faceless individual they could push around, someone who wouldn't fight back. But what they didn't realize was that their arrogance was about to lead them straight into a trap. Officer 1, the taller of the two, leaned forward on the witness stand, resting his elbows on the railing as if he owned the place. His tone was casual, almost bored as he recounted how they'd caught the defendant red-handed. He described finding stolen goods in her car, but his words carried a sneer, as though the idea of her innocence was laughable. "She tried to act all innocent when we pulled her over," he said, chuckling under his breath. "Like anyone would, believe her story," his partner chimed in, nodding along enthusiastically. "Yeah, it's always the same with these types," she added, her voice dripping with disdain. "They think they can talk their way out of anything, but let me tell you, nobody fools us." She glanced toward the defendant, letting out a short, sharp laugh that echoed through the room. A few people in the gallery snickered nervously, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent. What made their behavior so infuriating wasn't just the mockery, it was the underlying attitude. These officers weren't just testifying against someone accused of a crime. They were treating her like she was less than human. Every comment they made carried an undertone of superiority, as if their badges gave them permission to belittle anyone who crossed their path. They spoke as though people like her, black women, low-income individuals, those without connections, were, beneath them, unworthy of respect or fairness. At one point, Officer 1 turned to the prosecutor and joked about how easy this case was going to be. "Honestly, I don't even know why we're here," he said, shrugging. "It's open and shut, she's guilty, end of story." His partner nodded in agreement, adding, "Yeah, and honestly, someone like her probably doesn't even understand half of what's happening right now. She's just sitting there hoping for a miracle." Their laughter filled the room again, drawing more nervous chuckles from the crowd. It was clear that some attendees were uncomfortable, shifting in their seats or avoiding eye contact altogether. Others seemed entertained, leaning in slightly as if they were watching a show rather than a real-life legal proceeding. The judge, a stern-looking man in his 60s, cleared his throat loudly, trying to regain control of the room. "Let's stick to the facts, please," he said firmly, though his words did little to curb the officer's confidence. All the while, the defendant sat perfectly still. Her hands rested on the table in front of her, fingers laced together tightly. Her expression remained neutral, betraying no hint of emotion. But inside, a storm was brewing. Every insult, every condescending remark, only strengthened her resolve. She had trained for years to handle situations like this, to remain calm, under pressure, to resist the urge to lash out and to let the truth speak for itself. And the truth, she knew, was about to come crashing down on these officers in ways they couldn't possibly imagine. As the questioning continued, the defense attorney, an ally planted by the FBI, began laying the groundwork for the big reveal. He asked pointed questions, subtly highlighting inconsistencies in the officers' stories. For example, when Officer 1 claimed they'd found the stolen items during a routine traffic stop, the lawyer pressed him on the timeline. "You say you discovered the evidence immediately after pulling her over," the attorney said slowly. "But according to your report, it took nearly 20 minutes before you searched the vehicle. Can you explain that discrepancy?" Officer 1 hesitated, caught off guard by the question. He glanced at his partner, who offered a weak smile in return. Well," he stammered, fumbling for an answer. "We had to secure the scene first, make sure everything was safe." "Secure the scene?" the lawyer repeated, raising an eyebrow. "For a simple traffic violation? That seems unusual, doesn't it?" The officer shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier bravado starting to crack. His partner jumped in to save face, offering a vague explanation that only raised more questions. The tension in the room began to shift, not dramatically, but enough for people to notice. Something about the defense attorney's line of questioning felt different, sharper, more calculated. Meanwhile, the defendant listened intently, her eyes occasionally flicking toward the gallery. She noticed the subtle changes in body language, the reporters scribbling furiously, the jurors exchanging skeptical glances, the officers squirming in their seats. Each reaction fueled her quiet determination. This wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore. It was about proving that everyone deserved to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their background or circumstances. And then, just as the prosecution wrapped up its case, the defense attorney stood up, his demeanor calm but commanding. "Your Honor," he began, addressing the judge directly, "I'd like to introduce Exhibit A into evidence, a piece of surveillance footage that sheds new light on this case." He paused for effect, letting the weight of his words sink in. The courtroom fell silent, anticipation hanging thick in the air. No one knew it yet, but this moment would change everything, not just for the officers on trial, but for the entire community. The video would expose the truth, turning the tables in ways no one saw coming. And the woman sitting quietly at the defendant's table? She was about to become the most powerful force in the room. The courtroom fell silent as the defense attorney requested permission to present Exhibit A. The judge nodded, his expression unreadable but his curiosity evident. Everyone leaned forward slightly, their eyes glued to the screen mounted on the wall. Even the two officers who had been so confident just moments ago seemed uneasy, exchanging quick glances as if trying to figure out what was coming next. "This footage," the defense attorney began, his voice steady and deliberate, "was obtained from a security camera positioned near the scene of the alleged crime. It shows events that occurred prior to the arrest in question." He pressed a button on a remote, and the screen flickered to life. Grainy but clear enough, the video showed the defendant's car parked along a quiet street. Then, something shocking unfolded. In the footage, two figures easily identifiable as the very officers sitting in the courtroom approached the vehicle. One of them carried a small bag, which they casually placed inside the car before stepping back and looking around. They didn't seem rushed or nervous. Instead, their movements were calculated, almost routine. After planting the item, they stood there for a moment, exchanging a few words before walking away. The courtroom erupted into murmurs. People shifted in their seats, some gasping audibly while others whispered to their neighbors. Reporters scrambled to jot down notes, their pens moving furiously across notepads. The jurors exchanged wide-eyed looks, clearly stunned by what they were seeing. The officers, however, froze. Their earlier smugness vanished, replaced by panic as they realized their actions were now undeniable proof of wrongdoing. Before anyone could fully process the implications of the video, the defense attorney turned toward the defendant. "Your Honor," he said, addressing the judge again, "I believe it is time for the truth to come out." With that, he gestured toward the woman sitting at the defendant's table. She stood up slowly, her movements calm and deliberate. For the first time since the trial began, she removed her glasses, revealing sharp, intelligent eyes that scanned the room with quiet authority. "I am not who you think I am," she announced, her voice strong and unwavering. Every head in the courtroom snapped toward her, all eyes fixed on this woman who had been dismissed as powerless just moments earlier. She held up a badge, its metallic gleam catching the light. "My name is Dr. Evelyn Carter, and I am the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The room exploded into chaos. Gasps filled the air. Chairs screeched against the floor as people stood up, and reporters practically leapt out of their seats to get a better view. Some attendees whispered frantically to one another, trying to make sense of what they were hearing. Others simply stared, dumbfounded, unable to reconcile the image of the humble defendant with the powerful figure standing before them. Evelyn waited patiently for the commotion to die down, her presence commanding even amidst the pandemonium. When the noise finally subsided, she continued, her tone firm but measured. "This entire operation has been part of a federal investigation into systemic corruption within law enforcement. Officers Harris and Ruiz," she pointed directly at the two men still frozen in shock, "you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, falsifying evidence, and violating civil rights." Her words hit like a thunderclap. The officers' faces turned pale, their mouths opening and closing as if they wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. One of them slumped back in his chair, defeated, while the other buried her face in her hands, shaking her head in disbelief. Outside, federal agents stationed nearby entered the courtroom, their badges visible as they moved swiftly to handcuff the pair. The sound of metal clicking shut echoed through the room, punctuating the gravity of the moment. For Evelyn, this wasn't just a personal victory. It was a triumph for accountability. She had spent months planning this undercover operation, knowing full well the risks involved. Being mocked, belittled, and underestimated had been painful, but she endured it all because she believed in the importance of exposing the truth. Now, standing tall in front of the same people who had ridiculed her, she felt a deep sense of vindication, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly by those in power. As the officers were led away, protests erupted from their supporters in the gallery. "This is outrageous!" one man shouted, pointing angrily at Evelyn. "You're abusing your authority." Others chimed in, their voices rising in defense of the accused. But Evelyn remained unfazed. She knew backlash would come, that some would accuse her of overreach or call her methods extreme. But she also knew that real change often required bold action. Once the initial shock wore off, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted dramatically. Jurors who had looked skeptical during the prosecution's case now appeared ashamed, realizing they had nearly convicted an innocent person based on fabricated evidence. Members of the public began filing out, many shaking their heads in disbelief while reporters rushed outside to break the story to the world. Evelyn took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. This was only the beginning. While the arrest of these two officers was significant, it was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Corruption ran deep, and rooting it out would take time, effort, and relentless determination. But today she had struck a major blow against injustice, sending a clear message. No one, not even those sworn to uphold the law, was above accountability. With the trial effectively over, Evelyn stepped outside the courthouse, where cameras flashed and microphones were thrust toward her face. Reporters shouted questions, eager for details about the dramatic turn of events. But Evelyn kept her responses brief, focusing on the bigger picture. "This isn't about me," she said firmly. "It's about ensuring that our justice system works for everyone, regardless of race, gender, or background. We have a long way to go, but today, we took an important step forward." As she walked away, surrounded by her team of agents, Evelyn allowed herself a small private smile. The road ahead would be challenging, but she was ready. For years, she had fought to bring transparency and fairness to law enforcement, and today proved that her efforts were far from futile. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in a long while, hope felt tangible. And Evelyn intended to keep pushing forward, one step at a time. The fallout from the courtroom revelation was immediate and explosive. News outlets scrambled to cover the story, with headlines screaming about the dramatic arrest of two veteran police officers by none other than the director of the FBI. Social media lit up like wildfire. Videos of Evelyn's confrontation going viral within hours. People couldn't stop talking about it. How she had been mocked, underestimated, and ridiculed only to turn the tables in the most unexpected way. For Harris and Ruiz, the two officers now sitting in custody, life as they knew it unraveled overnight. Their colleagues distanced themselves quickly, fearful of being associated with their actions. Some even cooperated with investigators, hoping to save their own careers by spilling details about the corruption network they were part of. But for Harris and Ruiz, there was no escape. They faced a laundry list of charges: planting evidence, falsifying reports, violating civil rights, and more. Each accusation carried heavy penalties, and public opinion wasn't exactly on their side. The backlash against them grew louder as the surveillance footage aired repeatedly on news channels. Viewers watched in disbelief as the video clearly showed the officers tampering with evidence. A blatant abuse of power that left many questioning how widespread such practices really were. Protesters gathered outside the precinct where the YAO2 worked, holding signs that read, "Justice for all and no more corruption." Community leaders called for sweeping reforms, demanding transparency and accountability from law enforcement agencies across the country. But while Harris and Ruiz became symbols of everything wrong with policing, Evelyn found herself at the center of a different kind of storm. Her decision to go undercover personally sparked heated debates both inside and outside the FBI. Supporters hailed her bravery, calling her a trailblazer who risked her safety to expose corruption. Critics, however, questioned whether her methods were justified. Some argued that sending the director of the FBI into the field set a dangerous precedent, putting her in unnecessary danger. Others accused her of using her position to make a spectacle out of the investigation. Internally, tensions flared among FBI leadership. Senior officials held emergency meetings to discuss the optics of the operation. "We're supposed to be above reproach," one high-ranking agent said during a closed-door session. "What happens if something goes wrong next time? Do we send the director undercover every time we need answers?" The argument carried weight, but Evelyn stood firm. She addressed her team directly, explaining why she felt compelled to take matters into her own hands. "I didn't do this for show," she told them, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "I did it because I needed to see firsthand what ordinary citizens face when they're targeted by corrupt systems. Sitting behind a desk in Washington doesn't give you the full picture. Sometimes you have to walk in someone else's shoes to truly understand their struggle." Her words resonated with many agents who admired her dedication, but not everyone was convinced. A few whispered about insubordination or overreach, though none dared say it to her face. Despite the criticism, Evelyn refused to apologize. To her, the ends justified the means. If going undercover meant exposing decades of systemic abuse, then she'd do it again without hesitation. Meanwhile, the nation grappled with the broader implications of the case. For some, Evelyn's takedown of the rogue officers represented a victory against injustice, a sign that even the most powerful institutions could be held accountable. For others, it highlighted the deep-rooted problems plaguing law enforcement and the urgent need for reform. Debates raged online and offline, with people sharing personal stories of mistreatment at the hands of police. Activists seized the moment, organizing rallies and petitions aimed at dismantling systemic racism and promoting transparency. Evelyn kept a close watch on these developments, knowing the work wasn't done yet. While the arrest of Harris and Ruiz marked a significant win, it was only one battle in a much larger war. Behind the scenes, the FBI continued its investigation, uncovering evidence of similar misconduct in other departments. Dozens of officers were implicated, leading to arrests and disciplinary actions nationwide. It was clear that the problem extended far beyond one small town. It was systemic, pervasive, and deeply entrenched. Despite the progress, Evelyn couldn't shake the emotional toll of the ordeal. The mockery she endured in the courtroom stayed with her, replaying in her mind whenever she let her guard down. Those insults weren't just directed at her. They represented years of prejudice and bias faced by countless black women in positions of authority. Evelyn had spent her career proving her worth, breaking barriers and shattering stereotypes. Yet moments like that reminded her how much work still needed to be done. She leaned on her support system during this time: family, friends, and trusted colleagues who understood the weight she carried. One evening, after a long day of meetings, she sat in her living room scrolling through social media. Messages poured in from strangers thanking her for standing up to injustice. Some shared heartfelt stories of how her actions inspired them to speak out against discrimination in their own lives. Reading those messages brought tears to her eyes, not because she sought recognition, but because it reinforced why her work mattered. As days turned into weeks, Evelyn began preparing for the next phase of her mission, addressing Congress. She knew the trial had captured the public's attention, but lasting change required legislative action. New laws were needed to hold law enforcement accountable, protect whistleblowers, and ensure fair treatment for all citizens. Evelyn poured her energy into crafting a comprehensive report detailing her findings and proposing concrete solutions. It wasn't glamorous work, but she believed it was essential. When the day finally came for her to testify before lawmakers, Evelyn walked into the Capitol building with purpose. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions, and supporters lined the streets holding signs of encouragement. Inside, the hearing room buzzed with anticipation. Lawmakers leaned forward in their seats, eager to hear from the woman who had become a symbol of hope for so many. Evelyn took a deep breath as she approached the podium. Looking out at the sea of faces, she reminded herself of the reason she was there, not for glory or recognition, but to fight for justice. As she began speaking, her voice rang clear and strong, carrying the weight of experience and determination. "Today isn't about me," she said, pausing to meet the gaze of each lawmaker. "It's about creating a future where no one has to endure what I, and countless others, have faced, where trust is restored between communities and those sworn to protect them, where accountability isn't an exception but the rule." Her testimony lasted nearly 2 hours, covering everything from systemic racism to the importance of transparency. By the end, the room erupted in applause, with several lawmakers rising to their feet. Evelyn allowed herself a brief smile, knowing she had planted seeds of change. But as she left the building later that evening, surrounded by supporters and allies, she reminded herself that the journey was far from over. This was just the beginning. Evelyn stood at the podium in front of Congress, her presence commanding yet humble. The room was packed. Lawmakers, journalists, activists, and citizens all gathered to hear what she had to say. It wasn't just a hearing. It felt like a reckoning, a moment where decades of frustration and injustice could finally be addressed. Evelyn knew this was her chance to push for real change, but she also understood that words alone wouldn't fix everything. Action would. She began by sharing stories, not statistics or abstract ideas, but real-life accounts of people who had been failed by the system. She spoke about families torn apart by wrongful arrests, businesses destroyed because of biased policing, and lives cut short due to excessive force. Her voice trembled slightly as she recounted these tales, not out of fear, but out of empathy. These weren't just cases to her. They were human beings with dreams, hopes, and loved ones who mourned them. "Every time someone is treated unfairly by those sworn to protect them," she said, pausing to look directly at the lawmakers, "we lose a piece of our humanity. Trust erodes, communities fracture, and the divide between us grows wider." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Even the most skeptical members of Congress seemed moved, their pens scribbling, notes furiously. Evelyn didn't sugarcoat anything. She laid bare the flaws in the system, the lack of accountability, the culture of secrecy, and the systemic biases that allowed corruption to thrive. But she didn't stop there. For every problem she highlighted, she offered solutions: independent oversight boards, mandatory body cameras, stricter penalties for misconduct, and comprehensive training programs focused on de-escalation and cultural sensitivity. Her testimony struck a chord with many, especially when she shared her own experience. In the courtroom, "I've spent my life fighting for justice," she said, her tone steady but filled with emotion. "But I never imagined I'd have to fight so hard just to be seen as human in the eyes of some officers. That's not how it should be. No one should have to prove their worth to receive fair treatment." As she spoke, her words resonated far beyond the walls of the Capitol building. People watching live streams or reading transcripts online felt seen, validated, and empowered. For years, they had felt powerless against a system that seemed stacked against them. Now here was someone in a position of authority saying, "You deserve better." Outside the hearing room, grassroots movements gained momentum. Activists organized rallies, petition drives, and community meetings, channeling the energy sparked by Evelyn's testimony into tangible action. Social media buzzed, with hashtags like Darn Justice for All and Our Accountability Now, amplifying voices long ignored. Some cities began implementing reforms even before Congress passed new legislation, inspired by Evelyn's call to action. But not everyone applauded her efforts. Critics argued that her proposals went too far, warning that increased oversight might discourage good officers from doing their jobs. Others accused her of playing politics, claiming she was using her platform to advance her career rather than improve the system. Evelyn heard these criticisms loud and clear, but she refused to let them derail her mission. Instead, she doubled down, engaging directly with skeptics to explain why reform was necessary, not just for marginalized communities but for law enforcement itself. "We ask our officers to do an incredibly difficult job," she told reporters, during a press conference after the hearing. They put their lives on the line every day to keep us safe. But if we want them to succeed, we need to give them tools and structures that support fairness and integrity. Accountability isn't punishment, it's protection. It protects the public, and it protects honest officers who are tired of seeing their profession tarnished by bad actors. Behind closed doors, Evelyn grappled with the emotional toll of her journey. Testifying before Congress was exhausting, both physically and mentally. Reliving the courtroom mockery, recounting stories of injustice and facing relentless scrutiny took its toll. Late at night, when the world quieted down, she allowed herself moments of vulnerability. She thought about the sacrifices she'd made, the sleepless nights, the missed family gatherings, the constant pressure of knowing millions looked to her for answers. Yet despite the weight she carried, she reminded herself why she started this fight in the first place. One evening, while sitting alone in her study, Evelyn received a letter from a young girl named Maya. Written in shaky handwriting, the note read, "Dear Director Carter, thank you for showing me that I can grow up to be strong and brave like you. My mom says you're changing the world and I believe her. Love, Maya." Evelyn held the paper close to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Moments like this reminded her that her work mattered, not just for today, but for future generations. As weeks turned into months, progress slowly emerged. Lawmakers introduced bills aimed at increasing police accountability, several of which passed with bipartisan support. Independent commissions were established to review cases of alleged misconduct, and funding was allocated to train officers in ethical decision-making. While the changes weren't perfect and certainly not fast enough for many, they represented a step forward. Evelyn continued traveling across the country, meeting with community leaders, law enforcement officials, and everyday citizens. She listened to their concerns, answered their questions, and worked tirelessly to bridge gaps between groups that had long viewed each other with suspicion. At times, the conversations were heated, with tempers flaring and old wounds reopening. But Evelyn remained patient, reminding everyone involved that meaningful change required patience, persistence, and compromise. Through it all, she stayed grounded by focusing on the bigger picture. Yes, the road ahead would be long and challenging. Yes, there would be setbacks and resistance, but Evelyn believed deeply in the power of collective effort. She often quoted a phrase she'd picked up early in her career: "Change doesn't happen overnight, but it happens one night at a time." By the end of the year, Evelyn's name had become synonymous with hope and resilience. People saw her, not just as a leader but as a symbol of what was possible when courage met conviction. Yet despite the accolades and admiration, Evelyn remained humble. She knew she wasn't the hero of this story. The real heroes were the countless individuals who refused to stay silent, who demanded better, and fought for justice even when the odds seemed insurmountable. As she prepared for another day of meetings and speeches, Evelyn glanced at the framed photo on her desk, a picture of her grandmother, a woman who had taught her the value of perseverance. Smiling softly, she whispered, "We're getting closer, Grandma. Closer to the world you dreamed." And then taking a deep breath, she stepped back into the fray, ready to keep pushing forward, one step at a time. Months had passed since Evelyn's dramatic courtroom reveal and her powerful testimony before Congress. The nation was still buzzing about the changes she had set in motion. But for Evelyn, this wasn't a moment to rest. It was a chance to reflect on how far they'd come and how much further they needed to go. She knew that real change didn't happen overnight. It took time, effort, and relentless determination. And while progress had been made, Evelyn understood that the fight for justice was never truly over. One crisp autumn morning, Evelyn found herself standing outside a community center in a neighborhood she had visited many times during her investigation. This place had once been a hotspot for corruption, where rogue officers preyed on vulnerable residents without fear of consequences. Now, however, it was bustling with life. Children laughing as they played basketball, families gathering for workshops, and volunteers handing out flyers about new programs aimed at rebuilding trust between the police and the community. Evelyn smiled as she walked through the doors, greeted warmly by people who now saw her not just as the director of the FBI but as an ally. They hugged her, shook her hand, and thanked her for giving them hope when they thought all was lost. "You showed us we could win," one elderly woman said, tears glistening in her eyes. "You showed us that no matter how big the problem, there's always a way to fix it." It was moments like these that reminded Evelyn why she did what she did. Her journey hadn't been easy. In fact, it had been grueling at times. But seeing the tangible impact of her work made every sacrifice worth it. From the young girl who sent her a heartfelt letter to the activists organizing rallies, Evelyn realized she was part of something much bigger than herself. She wasn't just fighting for accountability. She was helping to create a future where everyone felt safe, respected, and valued. But Evelyn also knew that true transformation required more than laws or policies. It demanded a shift in mindset. That's why she spent so much of her time traveling across the country, speaking directly to both law enforcement officers and citizens. In town halls, classrooms, and even living rooms, she shared stories of resilience, courage, and unity. She listened to concerns, answered tough questions, and encouraged open dialogue, knowing that healing wouldn't happen unless people were willing to listen to each other. Her message was simple yet profound. We're stronger together. It wasn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame. It was about finding common ground and working toward solutions. Evelyn often told audiences, "If we want to build a better system, we have to start by building better relationships. Trust isn't given, it's earned. And it's earned one conversation, one action, one day at a time." As the months rolled on, Evelyn became a household name, celebrated not just for her achievements but for her humanity. People admired her humility, her willingness to roll up her sleeves and get into the trenches, and her unwavering belief in the possibility of change. Yet despite the praise, Evelyn remained focused on the task at hand. She didn't seek recognition or fame. She simply wanted to leave the world better than she found it. By spring, the reforms she had championed began bearing fruit. Independent oversight boards were established in cities nationwide, ensuring that complaints against officers were investigated thoroughly and fairly. Body cameras became mandatory in most departments, providing transparency and holding everyone accountable. Training programs emphasized empathy, cultural awareness, and conflict resolution, equipping officers with tools to serve their communities more effectively. Perhaps most importantly, public perception started to shift. While skepticism lingered, and rightfully so, there was a growing sense of optimism. Communities that had once feared the police now saw glimmers of partnership. Officers who had once resisted reform began embracing it, realizing that accountability didn't weaken their authority. It strengthened it. Slowly but surely, bridges were being built. Still, Evelyn refused to declare victory. She knew that systemic issues couldn't be solved with quick fixes or surface-level adjustments. There would always be challenges, setbacks, and resistance. But she also believed deeply in the power of persistence. Every small step forward mattered, whether it was a teenager feeling inspired to pursue a career in law enforcement, or a veteran officer admitting he'd been wrong about certain practices. Change, Evelyn often said, wasn't a destination, it was a journey. On a sunny afternoon in late spring, Evelyn returned to the same courthouse where her undercover operation had unfolded. The building looked different now, its once intimidating facade softened by fresh coats of paint and vibrant murals created by local artists. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted too. Where tension and fear once dominated, there was now a sense of hope and renewal. Evelyn stood quietly in the empty courtroom, running her fingers along the wooden railing where she had sat as Lena Johnson. Memories flooded back, the mockery, the insults, the quiet anger that fueled her resolve. She allowed herself a moment of reflection, acknowledging how far she'd come since that day. Then, taking a deep breath, she turned to leave. As she stepped outside, she was greeted by a crowd of supporters. Activists, community leaders, and ordinary citizens who had gathered to celebrate the progress they'd achieved together. Cheers erupted as Evelyn appeared, and she raised her hand to thank them, her expression warm and grateful. Someone handed her a megaphone, and though she hadn't planned to speak, she felt compelled to address the group. "This is your victory," she said, her voice carrying over the cheers. "Not mine. You are the ones who refused to stay silent, who demanded better, who kept pushing even when the odds seemed impossible. Never forget that your voices matter, your actions matter, and together, we can keep moving forward." The crowd erupted again, chanting her name and holding signs that read, "Justice starts here and together we rise." Evelyn soaked it all in, feeling a mix of pride and humility. She knew the road ahead would still have obstacles, but she also knew they were ready to face them head on. Later that evening, as she sat alone in her office, Evelyn pulled out a notebook she kept tucked away in her desk drawer. It was filled with notes, quotes, and reminders she jotted down during difficult moments. Flipping to a blank page, she wrote a single sentence: "Change happens when good people refuse to give up." Closing the notebook, she leaned back in her chair, letting the words sink in. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight, and new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight she allowed herself to feel proud, not just of what she had accomplished, but of what they had achieved together. Evelyn Carter wasn't done yet, not by a long shot,